and that's you got in really. I mean, yeah, you got in early. If you're just joining us, this is the At Last podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jesse Eaves. We are live from the At Last with Jack Nelson, Jiu Jitsu black belt. You mentioned that you got to train with, literally the Lions Den down there at Greg Jackson. That's back when the early stable of those fighters. Now, today's topic will be martial arts, as we've already started to explore. Yeah. The term martial arts is a very divisive one, as you know. To some, it evokes vivid scenes of barbarism and brutality, serving no better purpose than quenching the public's appetite for blood, much like the Roman gladiator games. To others, however, martial arts has come to signify a means of mental and spiritual development, as well as a cultural growth and a way of preserving inherent cultural value. Martial arts can be all-encompassing. It can be, I think to a lot of people, martial arts is sort of scary. Now, what I did want to ask you is, do you think having martial arts in the public eye makes people more violent? Or do you believe Bruce Lee's assessment that a true martial artist is a peaceful man?
It's an interesting thing because, as someone who's been rooted in it my entire life, I guess I kind of have a biased opinion about this because, well, oftentimes you do meet practitioners that are kind of meatheads, some guys that, have a chip on their shoulder or whatever. There's a million different scenarios that can come about where you'll have someone who is like a more aggressive person. The vast majority of martial artists, especially ones that operate at a very high level, are really nice people. I mean, even the guys that put on a facade and, do things to sell fights, guys like Conor McGregor, it's like, you see him, if you ever get a chance to meet the guy in person, or if you ever, you ever watch interviews with him where he's not trying to promote a fight or anything like that. He does seems like a good dude, seems like, or at least especially, before he reached the level of fame that he was at, he seemed like a pretty down to earth guy as well. I think you give anybody, millions of dollars for fighting and, they get their head up their own ass even just a little bit. But, I was very fortunate. I got to meet George St. Pierre one of the times that I was down at Jackson's because he was going down there to,
The French superstar.
Yeah. And,
with a body like chiseled granite.
Yeah, I was 8 years old, I think, or 8 or 9 years old, and I was standing in there, and Keith Jardine, Nate Marquardt, Rashad Evans, and Joey Villasenor were doing round robins, and it was just
Explain what round robins are for people who might not know.
Round robins are when you go into, you get guys that are sparring, and essentially you'll have one guy go in there, and he does rounds with all three of the other opponents. They'll cycle out, and then the last guy stays in there, and they keep cycling through. So it's like,
right.
We have four guys go and say, Joey V goes in the cage or in the ring, and then Keith will go in, Keith Jardine, and then he'll go out after that round's over, and Nate Marquardt will come in. And then once that round's over, Rashad Evans will come in. And then Rashad stays in there, and Keith steps out, or Joey V steps out. And basically you just keep going in circles like that until you go through several times. So it's a good way for, one guy to have to go multiple back-to-back rounds.
Yes.
And get used to that.
With the idea being that let's say, the idea is essentially, when you're training for a fight, the other fighter might come off the stool in the second round a little fresher than you.
Yeah.
And so you want to be prepared if you're much more exhausted so they'll put you against a fresh opponent, right? A guy who's going to try and grind you into the cage and be relentless with a takedown and feed you uppercuts. And so you just have to develop that ability to be in a firefight and exchange precise blows and stay in the fight.
It's about getting to a point where you can fight someone who's fresh and ready to go when you're at your worst, when you're exhausted and everything like that. And so that's how a lot of those guys will roll through there. And so I was standing in there just watching this clusterfuck of 200-pound dudes just beating the hell out of each other. It sounded like tree trunks were falling over and everything like that in there. It's crazy. These guys were beating the hell out of each other.
They're big. Yeah,
This is before a lot of fighters really took into consideration concussions and the serious effects of training and sparring hard during training and everything like that.
It used to be just wars in the gym, and it's something that you mentioned Conor McGregor earlier. It's something that his coach John Kavanagh said. He said we try and emphasize not wars in the gym. There's no pride in the gym. It's all learning. What we try and emphasize is upgrading the software without damaging the hardware.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's so Conor McGregor adopts a lot of traditional Muay Thai sparring operates like this, where it's very light contact, and you're still feeling the moves and feeling the motions with someone while you're sparring with them. It's like technical sparring, basically.
Right.
Like, you'll go through where you're drilling with, like, basically just a little bit of resistance, and, you're throwing combinations, the other person has to defend and everything like that, but you're not making crazy contact because you don't want to knock each other out in training. Like, a perfect example of, like, that kind of thing going wrong was Forrest Griffin when he fought Anderson Silva. He had gotten knocked out, I think, twice during training leading up to that fight, and that's why he just went down like a fucking bag of potatoes when Anderson
with
caught
just
him with
a little
that jab.
Goofy, jab.
Yeah, his brain was just shutting down. Or Chuck Liddell, like, getting knocked out by Rich Franklin, towards the end there, towards the end of his career, was like very much like he'd just been concussed a few too many times.
Yeah, and it happens. You just once your brain realizes what's coming, it's like, okay, I've seen this before. You're not going to give up, so I'm just going to shut down. Yeah,
and so. And so I think that contributed even a little bit maybe to Keith Jardine, why he quit fighting.
The Dean of Mean.
Oh yeah, because he was a bad motherfucker back in the day.
He was a championship contender at one point. Obviously the division was stacked back then. That was when the big guys were. That was when that was the age of the dinosaurs, when the big guys still ruled the planet.
Oh yeah, and in a time too before USADA, where like I don't think that everybody was juicing, but people were. You could get away with it a lot easier back in that time too.
When you see the bodies before and after USADA, it's just like, okay.
It's insane. Alistair Overeem and Vitor Belfort are the most insane examples.
Probably the most egregious, right? So Meryl Streep recently said that martial arts should not be called arts. They shouldn't even have the word arts in them. What do you think? Do you agree with that assessment, or do you think there's room for creative expression in martial arts?
I think that is a very uneducated assessment of watching it, because oftentimes, like, I think that people should just know what it is when they get into it. Like, mixed martial arts in particular is a violent sport, but it is not any more violent or damaging than football or boxing, or like, people look at mixed martial arts, especially, there's a stigma around it. Like, it's a weird thing that I've seen sometimes where some people are all right with watching boxers but not mixed martial artists, because they don't like watching dudes like get hit in the face while they're on the ground and stuff like that. It's a little too real. But the way I look at it is, like, if you ever watch a character that has like a really, really stylistic kind of fighting style, for lack of a better term, someone like a Yair Rodriguez or something like that can do like a jump spinning 360 roundhouse kick.
We should
crazy
explain,
spinning taekwondo kick like that. It's like, do you really, like, if you consider dancing and gymnastics to be a beautiful expression, how is that not a beautiful expression? Because what that guy is doing is it takes the exact same amount of skill and practice and everything like that to be able to execute, like, a 360 roundhouse kick where you're jumping, spinning in the air, and then throwing a kick.
Right.
It takes so much skill and athleticism to be able to pull something like that off, so much practice. And something like that, if you're watching a figure skater or if you're watching a gymnast, it's like, that's incredible, right? Put that into a situation where that guy is now having to defend against someone trying to kill them. Like, just, these guys are killers that fight in the UFC now. It's insane the level of fighters that, exist. So the way I look at it is that, even though it might not be for someone who's not a violent person or is not accustomed to that, it can come off as violent. I think it's very, ignorant to say that it's not beautiful in its own right, that it's not a martial art, because just the amount of skill and practice and talent that goes into, what these guys do every day with their training is, it's an insult really to, try and say that these guys aren't artists. Every punch, every kick, every takedown, every time you see some insane, judo throw that no one else can do, or some jump spinning kick like that, it's like, those guys are unique. Not everybody can do that. Just like not everybody can paint a beautiful mural. I'm sure, if you spent the time practicing and got an early start and everything like that, you could teach someone to draw, you could teach someone to paint, just like you can teach someone a martial art. But how is that any less significant? You know what I mean? I don't know. Yeah, I find it very, very egregious that people, will shoot down martial artists for thinking that just because, it's a competitive sport and that there's, violence associated with it, that it can't be a beautiful art. I mean, think about some of the most beautiful pieces of art that you've ever seen. It's not uncommon to see, paintings or drawings of warlike situations or of violent images. It's not exactly an uncommon thing. So how is that, any different? I mean, most art comes from a dark place. And can you really think of a darker place than someone who is essentially getting paid to get punched in the face? I mean,
Yeah.
even the nicest guys. I was talking about this earlier. How some of these guys that are just like super easygoing, very polite, very professional, and they don't have anything to prove. Those are the guys that I enjoy being around.
I totally agree. And, you have uh, a lot of opponents of the martial arts. John McCain once called it human cockfighting, and but I think a lot of proponents will say that it's an engine for spiritual development and mental development, and as well as physical development, and really pushing your limits. But I think also going back to the statement earlier that a true martial artist is a peaceful man, because it's something that's been talked about a lot. But after I started training jujitsu, after I started doing kickboxing stuff, it's like once you know that you have these tools sharpened and ready to use at a moment's notice, the less you feel the need to let people know.
Absolutely, and especially if you train, a very serious like self-defense related martial art, like guys that do Krav Maga or people that train, combatives where it's, not intended as like sport application, but it's more so like, self-defense application. It's like more power to you if you do something like that too, just because that's really the truest expression of what martial arts are. Like this is something that I always bring up is that we live in kind of an interesting time right now, culturally, particularly in Western society, because violence it's not nearly as normal of a part of life as it used to be. When these martial arts were in development, like I think particularly a lot about Japanese martial arts, jiu-jitsu, judo, kendo, like, martial arts that came about when these guys were fighting with swords. And it's a way more real part of life, particularly in that culture. I mean, if you ever read about feudal Japan, it's fucking insane. But, the modern application of those martial arts isn't nearly as what people today would think of as like an egregious, violent application. So it's kind of hard for people to wrap their heads around it, but it's like the amount of creativity that went into these martial arts developing, particularly I think of jiu-jitsu especially, because jiu-jitsu is, I don't know exactly when it's dated, but it's hundreds if not thousands of years old as a practice. Feudal Japan, how it was developed and everything like that, it's at least hundreds of years old. And it's been essentially modified and adapted, and it's evolved so much from what it was originally conceived as. But most of the applications of things that are used in it today, joint locks, submissions, taking people down, or in judo when you're doing your body manipulation and everything like that, people figured that shit out hundreds of years ago, and it's still useful today. And that is something that I think that you can't really discount when you think of something as an art, because there's some pieces of art that are just timeless.
Yeah.
You look at a Da Vinci painting or a diagram of something that he drew, like, some of those diagrams of the human anatomy and everything like that. And it's like, stuff like that is timeless. This is a man who was ages before his time in intelligence and creativity. How can you honestly tell me that someone who invented a martial art or, went through the entire development process that it took to create that, how can you tell me that that man is not an artist, that he doesn't have the same level of creativity? It may be applied to something that people, at least in our day and age, aren't as accustomed to as a traditional art, or music or, anything like that, but it took just as much creativity and talent and ingenuity to develop that. And that's why I think that it's kind of fucked up for someone who really has no foot in that world. Someone like Meryl Streep or any other actor or politician, anybody who hasn't fought before, it's kind of fucked up to, go outright and say that it's not an art and that it's,
Yeah. I agree with you. Some would say, I think some purely view the combat sports as purely a form of entertainment. However, I think there's also others, that argue that martial arts such as boxing, Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, sort of aid in the preservation of a nation's intangible cultural heritage. Do you lean in any particular way, or do you think there's room for both arguments?
Well, I think it's interesting, too, especially if you look at something like Muay Thai. Like, Muay Thai in Thailand is an insane national sport. I mean,
the king sport, right?
It really is. I mean, and these that is one of the greatest representations. Like, there's all kinds of things that people can use to represent culture, particularly in a cultural melting pot like the United States. Whether it be food or art or literature or music or whatever it is. For Thailand, Muay Thai is every bit one of those, cultural kind of staples, one of those things that, sets them aside, that is very unique to their culture. Or, boxing and wrestling are, originating in Greece, or Jiu Jitsu in Japan, or the adapted Brazilian Jiu Jitsu that the Gracie family implemented and everything like that. These are now parts of those countries' cultures. And, like every culture has a warrior culture. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that it's interesting seeing how this is evolving in the modern day, because there's so much, crossbreeding and so much, mixing of martial arts and everything like that. Everybody's practicing everything. You can go to a UFC gym, a local UFC gym that doesn't really even have any professional fighters, and you can still at least get the foundation for, learning how to fight. It's incredible. And that kind of thing wouldn't be possible without all these cultures kind of coming together and showing off what they have to offer. So yeah, I very much so lean towards, seeing it as a form of cultural expression, because, karate, jiu-jitsu, judo, those are every bit as much of a part of Japan's culture as their art style or the music that comes from there. Muay Thai in Thailand is just as important to the way that the rest of the world views them, or the way the rest of the world consumes them, as the food that you're used to eating.
Right.
You don't get Thai food. It might not be as widely, consumed or even accepted, but it is at least as significant, if not more significant, than any of those other things that we kind of absorb and adapt from cultures, because that comes from a very deep and true part of their culture, which is from an oppressed, standpoint. Like, throughout history in Southeast Asia, there's been, all this, especially in recent history, when you think about during the Cold War and everything like that, the amount of fighting that was going on in Southeast Asia and Vietnam, and, it's just, the values that they use in combat, in war, it's very significant to their culture and their history.
I totally understand what you're saying. It's interesting that you were mentioning about, it is a warriors. A lot of the arts were developed because when people think of martial arts, a lot of people, it harkens to the East Asia and the Orient. A lot of people think about the Oriental martial arts. But martial arts, the term, it actually comes from Latin.
Yeah, Mars.
The arts of Mars, who's the Roman god of war. So the martial arts are quite literally the arts of war. But I think that's it's sort of an interesting dichotomy, because there is such a strong connotation with war, and it could be argued that the practice of martial arts could make those that practice them more warlike. But I also read a really, really interesting quote, and I'll read it to you right now. It's the nation that will insist upon drawing a broad line of demarcation between the fighting man and the thinking man is liable to find his fighting done by fools and his thinking done by cowards.
That's interesting. Yeah, I kind of like that, because that presents a point that it's a stereotype that I really, really am against, and it's that fighters are meatheads, that all fighters are like these douchey guys that are, very confrontational and everything like that. And I think that's a perfect example to the, counterpoint of that, which is that, it takes a certain level of intelligence and talent and ingenuity to be a really good fighter, just like it takes that to be, an artist in any other form. So, I like that, and I think that's, a perfect example of what I'm talking about right now, is that, right. It's very misunderstood in a lot of respects by people that aren't, adapted to it. And I'll say that it's not for everybody. Like, I don't even think, if you're not into it, if you're just not a violent person, then don't watch it. Nobody's making you. But, I don't think that you should assume that just because it is negative in your eyes, that it's not positive in somebody else's eyes. I mean, I know that if I wasn't training from the time that I was really young, like, I didn't have a really fucked up upbringing, but, if I didn't have something to do to take out my aggression, for some people it's football, soccer, baseball, something other, something physical like that, hockey. There's plenty of other sports that are contact sports that people play, but for me, it was martial arts. That was all I really thought that I was good at. I never played basketball or football or anything like that. Never got into them. And if I didn't have that, then I might not have grown up to be a very temperate guy.
It's true,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of sort of what you were talking, a lot of that respect and that discipline, I feel like can come from a very good teacher, and especially when it comes to the martial arts, when you have a steady hand. And it sort of leads into my next question very well, what you were saying. So since the beginning of time, there have been masters and there have been pupils. And for every Mike Tyson, there's a customato. You know, for every Bruce Lee, an Ip Man. For every Alexander, a Leonidas. Do you think true mastery is possible without a master to learn from? Can iron be shaped without the hands of a blacksmith, in other words?
You know, it is very it's interesting because this draws parallels for me of outside of martial arts, because you get these guys that are just incredible at something, like it just clicks for them. Like a good example I always use, it's from a fictional movie, but you know, they even talk about a real person. It's from there's a quote from like Good Will Hunting, I think it was, and it's when he's initially talking to Robin Williams' character about, you know, Will, and he's trying to explain, you know, what he's like, and he explains the story of Ramanujan, who is this guy from India who essentially, I don't, you know all the details of the story, but he basically found a really basic math book and was able to extrapolate all these equations that had been baffling mathematicians for years, you know, just from this really simple little text. And so every once in a while, even in, you know, non-combative sports, or, you know, in practices or arts or anything like that, sometimes you just get these savants that it just clicks
Just
for them.
clicks,
It
yeah.
just works. And so I think that even though that's a minority, those people exist in every aspect, whether it be from music. Like, I know some guys that I went to high school with that never played an instrument in their life, and they were able to pick up a guitar, and within an hour of just sitting there messing with it, they were already able to start playing songs.
Right.
Or, you know, they might not have very good, like, coordination for doing their chord progression. Like, you know, they might still mess it up because they're not used to moving between the different things, but it's like, teach them 3 or 4 chords, and they'll be able to play a song right there. I know some guys that came into the gym even while I was training and everything like that, and it was like I was never like super talented, but I just spent so many years doing it that I, you know, kind of accumulated the knowledge that I have now, which I think for being at the age I'm at is like a decent, you know, amount. You know, and you and I have trained together, so
Right.
you know, I'd like to think that, you know, not to brag at all, but I like to think that I have a decent, you know,
Understanding.
basis, and
Right.
you know, always have more to learn, obviously.
Right.
But you know, I would like to think that I'm, you know, decent enough. I've been doing it for long enough that I kind of know what's going on. There's some guys that came in, and after a week of doing some kickboxing and everything like that, once they developed a little bit of flexibility, they could throw a kick more clean than I could, or they just had like something about it just clicked to them. And so I think that it's not like they're very rare, but yeah, I think that, you know, sometimes there will just be a figure that'll come about that'll just they just get it, and you know, everybody I think needs someone to teach them at some point, and there's always something to learn. That's a good, you know, thing to always keep in mind, especially
Right.
if you're a martial artist. Is that, you know, everybody, even, you know, a brand new white belt, could have something that they know that you don't.
Exactly.
Or they might even be able
Yeah.
to teach you something, even if it's like, even if what you think they're doing is bullshit, you know, the way they're doing something, even if you can go, okay, I don't want to do it that way, still listen to them. You
Yeah.
know, you know, you can always pick something up from somebody,
Yes.
or somebody might have some insight. So it's like, yeah, I think that some guys exist like that, or, you know, men and women exist like that are just savants at what they
Outliers,
do.
yeah.
And they're outliers. But I think it is absolutely necessary, even for those people, to have some guidance. Because you can't take, you know, even if you have someone who's just like super talented, you know, for lack of a better word, that they just kind of have a really natural understanding of the way those things work. That person, if they don't have access to some sort of information, they're probably not going to be able to do much with it. So
Right.
I think even for people like that, it's necessary to have a master, you know, or a coach
Right.
or teacher, you know.
Right. That's what you know. Mike Tyson has famously been quoted in interviews as saying that Customato broke him down so that he could build him up,
Oh, yeah.
because he, you know, he was engaged with all the skullduggery and crazy shit in the streets and getting in fights all the time and guns and knives, and you know, Iron Mike came up. To become Iron Mike, he had to put himself through the forge, and he had to go through this insane, fiery upbringing to become the boxer that he would later become. But it was under Customata's guidance, basically, and he said, you know, Cuss was the closest thing I had to a father, and he was my father. You know, Cuss, the motto, he basically looks at him as his father figure, and all the hours they spent in the gym, and he would introduce him to Muhammad Ali. But it takes it takes a master. It takes someone who can convert a young mind into that of a martial artist, and to make to make savage the body but make still the mind, is the famous Miyamoto Musashi quote. And but it really does take the master. And I did a bunch of research with the Journal of the American Medical Health Association, and what they found was they took all of these troubled youths who were scoring super low on positive quality tests, and they were getting in trouble, whether it was violence at home, stealing things, just lying to their teachers, getting all F's on their assignments, not doing their assignments, just basically, headed down what you could be called the wrong path. So they took all these kids, all these problem kids, and they did two things. They set half of them into a control group where they would just have an hour of unregulated PE time, basically. So you could shoot basketball, you could jump rope, you could run around the track, you could throw a dodgeball, you could do whatever you wanted. There's no rules, no structure at all. Then they took the other half and they put them into Taekwondo lessons. And after about 6 months, they tested them again. And what they found was, in the control group where they're still active, they scored higher on the positive trait tests, but not that much higher. It was just the act of being active assisted them in being a little bit more calm in the classroom and getting the energy out in the proper way. But the kids who did the Taekwondo, they engaged in this structure. Not only did they continue to do the Taekwondo because they had such an affinity for it, they scored much higher on their positive trait tests. Their teachers were saying their attitude, their whole demeanor had changed. They had started to have like no write-ups, no incident reports, and it basically, there's something about that family structure where you're bowing every time that you get on the mat, you're bowing to your opponent. It's the number one, the most important thing is respect between the martial artists, and it's so emphasized heavily, especially in the Oriental arts and in Muay Thai. In each sport has its own variation of respecting, touching gloves, bowing to your opponent. Jiu Jitsu, you did a little slide pound is nowadays. But I thought that was so interesting that the drastic difference in the positive trait testing.
Oh yeah, I've always been a proponent that because oftentimes I think there's a stigma around putting like really young kids, especially in martial arts, because a lot of parents think that they're gonna learn something there and then they're gonna go and beat somebody up at their school or something like that. Or there's like always gonna be a negative thing, but it's like if you have a good teacher, someone who really knows what the fuck they're doing with their kids, and I was really lucky that Sensei Eric. He was very, very good with kids still to this day. That's like, I think that's where he really is the best instructor. That's like, he's a very talented and very experienced instructor, especially with adults as well. But it's so much more fun watching him instruct kids just because it's like, it takes some real, you got to command some real respect that is comprehensible to a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old. For them to actually like sit down and shut up, like it,
Right.
you really have to, get it through their little head to, respect, the mat and the teacher and the people that they're training with and everything like that. And it's like that through that, constant kind of barrage that, they put the kids through and everything like that, where he's very patient, obviously, but, is also very stern, and then he's like, you can hurt somebody, especially that you're training with,
Right.
and or if you're not paying attention to me, you can hurt somebody or yourself. I think it's a good way to introduce kids, especially younger kids, to competition where they have to learn their limits, because like in football you're all padded up and everything like that, and these kids just truck the shit out of each other because they can. And they can, you can still get hurt in football and everything like that, but that's kind of like what the expectation is that you go your hardest when you're out there. But when you do something, that's like a combat sport related, whether it be boxing or kickboxing or even wrestling or whatever, in competition, you're obviously trying your hardest, but you learn in training how to mediate yourself, because you have to, because you don't want to hurt your training partners or anything like that. And so I think that lends itself really well when you're teaching kids. If you have someone who really gets that point across to them, if you're teaching young kids, it teaches them that they need to be careful even outside of the gym as well, and that whatever it is that they're kind of going through, not so much with younger kids because, I mean, who's really getting into fights in elementary school that much, but,
Right.
Middle school, high school, when everyone gets all hormonal and, hair starts popping out of them and they start going a little fucking crazy, at that point in time, having an outlet like that and one that teaches you your limits, like everybody thinks they're Billy Badass until they meet Billy Badass, you know what I mean?
Right,
And so if you meet Billy Badass in the gym, it's going to make you way more likely to, respect what other people potentially can do outside of there.
It'll make you less likely to fight. I found this particularly true with being around boxing for the first couple times where I would see people and even just doing light, sparring sessions and stuff like this. And you're like, oh, there are people out there who can really hurt you if you fight, and they can mangle you the same way that a jiu-jitsu black belt could mangle you on the ground. It's the same thing. There's levels to the game, and if the guy who is Bangkok ready in Muay Thai, you're not going to stand a chance if he's if you have to fight him. And I think it makes you not only less inclined to fight because you know that there are people out there, but you also know that it's not worth it because
whatever it is,
right.
Like whatever petty bullshit that gets you into a situation where you think you might get into a fight with someone, it's not worth it. It's like unless your life is in danger for whatever reason, it's really not. People get drunk, they do dumb shit, or whether it's just a petty thing. Like something interesting about Washington is actually we have mutual
combat.
I think I was talking to you about this a little bit. I don't know. I don't want to say this if it ends up not being true. I've just read a couple articles and everything like that about mutual combat in Washington, but it's like essentially if you have a authority figure like a police officer around that can essentially referee the match and make sure it doesn't turn into like aggravated assault, you can claim mutual combat with someone that you're having an altercation with. And
as long as they both agree, right?
Yeah, as long as you both agree and have a police officer there or a paramedic or someone that can like stop it before someone kills the other person. There's no weapons involved. People can throw down. There's videos, I can't remember the name of the mixed martial artist, but there's a guy who's a legitimate mixed martial artist that he does this here in Seattle.
Phoenix.
Is it Phoenix?
Something Phoenix.
Yeah,
he has Phoenix in the name.
Yeah, and whatever he does, he dresses up like a superhero. And he goes around.
And there's a guy bullying people, right? And he just went up to him.
Yeah, he went up and he just like, there's a video of him going up to this guy, and this guy was being a dick, doing something. I can't remember the entire context of the video, but he's dressed up as a superhero. There's a cop sitting right there, and they claim mutual combat, and then he fucks this dude up.
Yeah.
Like, just leg kicks him repeatedly.
Yeah.
And just like tears this dude up. Doesn't like seriously hurt him or anything like that, but he puts some hellfire on this guy's legs. Clearly he was Bangkok ready.
He's Bangkok ready.
and then the cop ended up stopping it, because this guy was clearly just getting lit up. But
I honestly think that is so hilarious that you can solve the problems. And honestly, it's better because there's no guns involved, there's no knives. Someone's probably going to walk away with a bruised ego.
Well, yeah, you know what?
But you're not going to end up killing someone.
You know where it happens most frequently is in like road rage. Like and here in Seattle, it's a big thing because driving up here sucks.
New Mexico's bad too.
Oh yeah, New Mexico, Albuquerque, New Mexico, drunk driving capital of the world. No, I don't know if it. And I think that Washington's one of the only states in the union that still has mutual combat.
Yeah,
which is ironic because this is at least Seattle is like a very kind of progressive, left-leaning, city. But yeah, it's super interesting, and that's really, I feel like if more places had that, you would probably see less incidences of guys getting into fights.
I think so too.
Or you would see like a spike, and then it would plateau out.
Right.
Because it was like if everybody knew that it was all right to just throw down and take out their road rage without anybody getting killed or seriously hurt or anything like that. You would definitely see a little spike. Like you would be like, as soon as that became legal, you would see like hundreds more people getting into fights in the middle of the road, and then everyone would, because they got it out of their system, they would be like, all right, it would slow the fuck down. After that,
Yeah.
But
it sort of harkens back to the medieval times, trial by combat, or you would challenge.
I challenge you to a duel.
Yeah, I challenge you to a duel. But
do you quarrel, sir?
Yeah. You quarrel, sir. Take the glove off, slap them in the face. It's
except instead of flintlocks or rapiers, just you could run into some dude that is fucking Bangkok ready, or some guy that can ride you like a human backpack and just chokes you out.
Yeah. See, I don't know. I think I would rather be mangled on the ground than mangled on the feet, because you're gonna end up walk away with a sore neck or maybe a joint out of place on the ground. But if you are standing up with a guy who's Bangkok ready, I mean, you're eating elbows, uppercuts, knees to the body, floating rib kicks. Like,
I suppose it depends on your perspective. I mean,
true,
like, because the thing that freaks me out about something like that is that, if you have somebody that's kind of mediating it, like if you have a police officer that's going to make sure nobody kills each other.
Yeah, you're not.
But it's like if you just get into a fight with somebody, especially if they're with friends and you guys end up on the ground, that's a bad position to be in.
Oh, you're saying like a real,
real legitimate fight. You don't want that shit on the ground. That's I always find it hilarious whenever I see like the videos of the Gracie, self-defense jiu-jitsu stuff. I'm like, you don't want to be trying to pull fucking flying arm bars on people while you're like, their joint manipulation and chokes are fine and definitely useful, especially in self-defense situations, but it's like, that's the last place I would want to be, is on the ground, because you don't know if this guy is a friend.
Fight? Yeah,
you don't know if this guy is a friend waiting around the corner, or if he's just like, here's the thing that I run into all the time, and like, when I'm training with dudes, I'm like kind of tall and lanky, and anytime I fight somebody that is like a wrestler that's like strong as shit, they just manhandle me. Like, I'm all right working off my back doing my jiu-jitsu, but like if I get someone who's just like strong as shit, that's like a little brick house.
There's something about the wrestling style, and I think part of it is the mentality that they train, cutting so much crazy amounts of weight, and so they're forced to develop this insanely strong mental game.
Yeah, these guys, their will is like impeccable, and also just because of the way that like jiu-jitsu is very much so, it's more of a finesse game. Like you have to have some muscular endurance, and you have to there are some points where you're gonna have to be activating your muscles and really straining and everything like that. But for the most part, it's like holding someone down and pinning them down and laying on them doesn't do you a whole lot of good.
Right.
Because if you can, if you're stronger than your opponent, you can just fucking manhandle him and hold him down.
Right. Yeah. It's such an interesting duality, because wrestling, it's like you said, you can just muscle someone and you can just will someone to the ground. You can be like a dog chasing a bone and just eventually suck the legs out and get them to the ground and be heavy on top and apply just an insane amount of pressure. So I think the scariest is when you get the jiu-jitsu guys who also are now wrestling. Those guys are terrifying.
Yeah, or like you get a character like Matt Hughes or George St. Pierre that have like insanely high-level wrestling, but incorporate also high-level submissions too, where they're strong as shit and they can take you down and hold you down on the ground.
Right.
But when they get down there, they're also dangerous with their chokes and their joint manipulation and everything like that.
Right.
It's an interesting thing to do.
1, 2, 3. Hey, there we go. Welcome back to the At Last podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Eaves. We're sitting here talking to Jack Nelson.
Talking about martial arts philosophy, and probably going to go down the rabbit hole into some NSFW type shit.
Some more, it's a little more slanderous type activities. Do you think there's a movie that had the most accurate representation of martial arts? Or do they usually do a pretty bad job?
Oh, that's so ridiculous. It's so like hard to pull off. It's interesting because you can like look at all kinds of like old school kung fu movies or even like Bruce Lee movies, and there's quite a bit of like the philosophical side of things that they delve into, but it is so hard to accurately portray fighting.
Yeah.
Like I thought like one of my favorite like martial arts movie or movie that has that as any type of like major thing is Warrior, but that movie has the almost unrealistic like portrayal of cage fighting. Not so much just the choreography, but like just the fact that it's like 2 days in a row of these guys fighting multiple times.
Right.
It's like these guys would be fucking dead if they had to do that. There's a reason that fighters only fight, once every 3 to 6 months usually, is because your body just can't handle it. It takes some time to recover and everything like that. And it's like the day after a cage fight is the most miserable, sore, fucked up that you'll ever feel.
Black eye, busted lip,
Yeah, like even when we were just doing drills the other day on the cage, and I had X marks on my back from being up against the cage.
Yeah.
Because that cage, that gym is also like kind of...
It's kind of rigid.
Yeah, it's pretty rigid compared to actual...
Well, because they only have the half cage, so they probably had to anchor it in super deep.
Yeah, so, and it's like just way more firm than like most of the cages that you get. But it was like, even that one I noticed it. Like I had bruises on my back and...
Yeah.
Like I had bruises all over my arms and I still have like a little bit of like a scrape here from the leather and shit like that.
Right.
Like... People get fucked up doing jiu-jitsu, man.
It's a lot of like friction, especially, and that's
Oh,
what
yeah.
the cauliflower ear comes. I mean, when you see a guy, if you're out in public and you don't know this already, I think most people know this. But if you see someone with cauliflower ear, do not fuck with that person ever. Do never ever fuck with that person.
Yeah, they were at least a wrestler.
They're at least
probably
yeah.
did some jiu-jitsu or judo or something along those lines.
Because you don't get that from taking a nap. You don't get that from sitting down.
For those who don't know what cauliflower ear is, it's when when you break the cartilage in your ear. Essentially, it gets like mushed up with all the wrestling and grappling that you do. Just being speared by people's skulls and being pressed against the mat and everything like that. And so your ear starts like producing more cartilage to fill in the space, and it causes your ears to just be like puffy and hard.
Right.
It's like, you're feeling the cartilage between your ear the way it like normally is. Imagine making that like the size of like half of a golf ball.
Right.
And it's like that's what cauliflower ear is. It's pretty hardcore.
Right. Oh yeah, and it's a phenomenon that's been observed in these fighters for a long time, because I sent you a picture of my favorite sculpture of all time. I'll put a picture of it up right now so you can see it. So look right there. But it's called The Pugilist at Rest, and you can see on the sculptor on his ear has like
this is an ancient Greek fucking sculpture, a little marble one that I think you did send me that. I think.
It's crazy, man. And he just got nicks and his eyes are hollow, and like this dude's just been through the ringer, and he's wearing the leather cestus wraps that the Romans would wear. When they fought each other. It's just insane. And it got to the point where, I had guys like Randy Couture where his ear is literally as solid as this headphone.
Yeah, like it's like they start having a hard time hearing because it actually is so thick that it muffles it. And like John Dodson has some hardcore cauliflower ear too.
Oh, man, yeah. Some guys have it really bad. Like, I remember I was watching an older fight the other day, and I was like, damn, Alexander Gustafsson. His ears, like, oh my.
And he's a pretty handsome dude too.
Yeah, he's like a Viking looking dude.
He's like a Norwegian 6'5", Norwegian dude, but he's got fucked up ears. It's like the plight. Like every single sport has something like that. Like people that weightlift a lot have fucked up hands. Like their hands are all calloused and torn up and everything like that. Guys that fight, like I have scar tissue all over my eyebrows and shit like that. And guys get cauliflower ear. Luckily, I don't have cauliflower ear. I've never gotten it, but yeah, like I see where it comes from, and guys that, especially in wrestling, because you get your head like speared a lot more in wrestling.
And you're doing a lot of head fighting where you're moving for position, trying to get on the inside.
Not only that, but I used to do evil shit. Like I only wrestled for 1 year, but like you just do mean stuff, like slapping each other in the ears and shit like that. I still do that sometimes.
Yeah.
It's it's kind of mean, but it's like
the Stockton slap.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
No, it's funny how all that works though, and like I just have I have weightlifters' hands, but on my feet. Like that's like what my feet are like. They're so calloused from spending so much time on the mat. And I also used to walk everywhere barefoot when I was a kid. So like I have calluses like that thick on the bottom of my feet. I've stepped on broken glass and not noticed it before because I just have like pads on the bottom of my feet that are like super thick.
Yeah. It's so
baby
true.
Hands though.
Yeah, same here, man. What can you do? But if you place it on the chin, you can get a lot more accurate. Obviously the dudes with the lunchbox hands, they can just hit you and put you. It's night.
Oh yeah, and that brings up an interesting thing that I thought would be interesting to talk about today too, is the difference between like MMA gloves and boxing gloves.
Yes.
'Cause that's something that like it's frequently brought up.
We got some right there.
Yeah, in conversations about like if you get like a 10 or an 8 or a 10-ounce glove. Right. I think this is probably a 10.
This might be 16 even. Yeah.
I don't know if they're that big.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But, whatever the case may be, but like something like this, you get hit with a boxing glove, and it's like you see how much it hits your entire face. It's a way more
the whole thing,
like blunt type of hit. Whereas an MMA glove is really not much more than like getting hit like with a bare knuckle. Almost.
Basically, just to protect your knuckles.
Yeah, that's all it really does. Is protect your hand.
Yeah,
and does a little bit to cut down, no pun intended, on cuts because there's Vaseline on the gloves as well. Right. It's like you're less likely to open up a cut with a punch from an MMA glove, but even so, it's still possible.
Yeah, happens all the time.
It still happens all the time. Yeah. So that kind of, but yeah, that's all they're really for. So it's like it's interesting seeing the evolution of striking in MMA as compared to like boxing and kickboxing because it's a way different type of defense that you have to implement.
Yeah.
That I think it's like that's why you see guys that fight MMA like, with like these kind of crazy like karate type styles.
Hands
like,
down,
Gunnar Nelson or Conor McGregor or Stephen Thompson or some of these guys that have that kind of fighting style. It's because head movement is much more important in mixed martial arts than it is in a lot of these other ones because you can't use your hands as a guard as much. Like,
Right.
You can't absorb a punch with this big ass glove that you got right
Right.
here. And so it's way more important to move around and be fluid, and that's why you see all these guys that can kind of operate with, that lower guard and everything like that. It's, it's kind of interesting to see.
Oh, it's amazing. What would be fascinating to me is I think is Vasily Lomachenko. If you guys have never seen a Vasily Lomachenko fight, just go check it out right now. Hit pause on this. Go check it out. It is insane. He makes it look like he's a matador.
Is this the Matrix Dude, the boxer?
Yeah,
that
he's
is like...
insane. He does a lot of stuff where he'll put a hand into your guard. So you got your closed guard. He'll put his hand up into your guard and block your view, and then he'll like apply pressure, and so he'll do like a little light tap to the sternum, and then he'll step. Literally, he'll step at a complete right angle to the side. So they open their guard up, and he's just gone. And then, boom, you're eating a punch from this. The way he moves is like...
I think it's interesting because, like, people that really do a lot of analysis of boxing in and of itself is very interesting. Like, I was never a very good straight boxer.
Right.
I just couldn't put it together as well as I could with, being able to use my legs too, being able to throw kicks. But it's like, it's really interesting to watch technical boxers at work. The same way that's interesting, like, a lot of the times it's boring. Like, the example I always give is, like, if you're watching, like, Olympic wrestling, these guys are so fucking good at what they're doing that it's almost hard to watch because they're, like, it's a chess match and there's not a lot going on. These guys are, like, walking in circles around each other trying to find an opening, but it's like you can't get it. That's kind of like what it's like to watch, like, really, really good technical boxers fight. It's like... It's very rare to see someone get knocked out. Like, I think Floyd Mayweather's a piece of shit, but watching him fight is really interesting because to the layman, they're like, oh, he dances around and runs away. No, he is so good defensively that he can stand in front of you and you won't hit him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you could throw 100 punches and not land one.
And some, he does do things where he's moving around on the outside and getting you to chase him down a little bit. But oftentimes what will happen is that he'll kind of get, he'll feel the rhythm out and he'll get to the point where he's understanding your offense and everything like that. And then he'll put some pressure on you. He'll land some volume and, it won't necessarily be like knockout kind of like crazy power or anything like that, but he'll land volume strikes on you and get points that way. And that's why it's like, I always consider Floyd Mayweather, like, I don't like to say one of the greatest fighters of all time, but he's one of the greatest boxers of all time.
Yes.
Especially defensively. Like, he just has such a crazy understanding of boxing at its core,
right?
That it's like that's why I find it so funny that there are a lot of people that think that Conor McGregor could actually take him out, and there's there's a certain like level of like who knows what the fuck could happen in that kind of fight.
Who knows? Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like one of my favorite boxers, Manny Pacquiao, who I consider to be actually, I think he's a better boxer,
right,
all around,
right,
than Floyd Mayweather is. Like, offensively, he's he's a more powerful puncher,
right.
And he's like a more aggressive fighter. And at least, if nothing else, I prefer watching him fight.
Yeah.
He couldn't outpoint Manny Pacquiao, and he couldn't knock him out. So what the fuck makes people think that Conor McGregor is going to have a better shot at doing that? Anything can happen. And
right.
It's like he might do it.
Yeah,
but I just don't see it happening. I just think that Floyd Mayweather is too good. He has too good of an understanding of how it works for him to actually pull it off. For Conor to beat him. I think, and not only that, but it creates like there's such a weird situation going on in professional mixed martial arts right now in the UFC with all the fucking the people that are bouncing around. Everybody gets a belt, and then there's all this crazy shit. Like Conor McGregor really threw things for a fucking loop when he came in and. They let him go for both titles, and then he's leaving to go do this boxing match. Like, it's brilliant on his part because he's making shitloads of money, and he's probably never gonna have to fight again after this if he doesn't want to, because he's got a family now and he can set himself up really well for like the rest of his life.
I think that's the idea.
Yeah, that's like you can see what he's doing in that regard, but it's like it definitely puts the sport in a weird position.
Yes, and I think. They still haven't discussed the terms and the conditions of the fight. So if they were to do it, like you said, there's no way in hell Floyd would agree to this, and he shouldn't. He shouldn't agree to having the MMA gloves because that would be signing his death warrant. I think.
Oh yeah, because like speaking of like the difference in defense, like changing that and making that one of the factors in the fight would make it like so much more fucking difficult for him to operate the way that he operates because Floyd Mayweather does have very good head movement and footwork, and he's good defensively of being out of the way of punches. but there is just a fact of the matter that like getting hit with an MMA glove is not the same as getting hit with a boxing glove.
Right.
It's not worse, but it's just different.
Right.
Yeah, it's like it's just a different
It's
kind
less
of contact.
cushion, yeah.
It's a different kind of defense that you have to, implement.
And that's Floyd, like you said, yeah, his whole defensive system. And I agree with you. I think he's probably the most surgical, definitely the best defensive boxer that the sport has ever produced. But he's really good at what they call the Philly shell, which is where instead of usually keeping, and sometimes he'll shell up here too, but the Philly shell is where you keep your power hand in the back and you keep it up by your head, and then you keep your other hand protecting your abdomen, and you roll your shoulder forward. And so when guys are missing him, it's by an inch, but he makes you miss.
They're making contact with your shoulder as he's doing that.
Yeah, and he's rolling and
roll
then
and
absorbing the other one, rolling, swatting out of the way. So he's like definitely the best defensive boxer. And so I think if they're gonna do it in a boxing ring with boxing gloves, which is absolutely what Floyd should sign to, because anything other than that, and I mean it's basically guaranteed death for him, because you can't block those kind of shots that Conor can throw with those gloves.
Not only that, but it's just like you're gonna see if Conor's smart, he's gonna come into it with a very unorthodox style. He's gonna come into it in a way that most boxers wouldn't approach it that way. Which is like adapting that, like it's just in a lot of ways it's a win-win, because regardless he's gonna make a shitload of money even if he loses,
and he's expected to lose. So
if he loses, he loses to one of the greatest boxers of all time. If he wins, he beats one of the greatest boxers of all time. It's
how fucking crazy. I'm still gonna put $100 on McGregor just because the odds are gonna be so crazy that if he manages
1,000 to 1,
exactly, if he somehow manages to pull it off, like
it's you just might not see the punch coming. And
I think that's why I love it so much. Is they call it the puncher's chance, but I think that's why I love the sport so much, is because you watch the NBA, it's gonna be the same 4 teams and every time in the in the conference finals. It's like, oh, the Cavaliers and the Warriors made it again. Who would have? Who would have thought? Yeah. But meanwhile, Ronda Rousey, who's this sure thing, who they're calling Holly a lamb to the slaughter. And Holly makes her look foolish, like embarrasses her.
Yeah, not only that, it's like I was interested to see how that was going to go, because I didn't know if Holly was actually ready for that fight when she was coming up, because she only had a few professional MMA fights. It was very recent that she had come from.
I'll be honest, I wasn't optimistic.
Yeah, like I think that Holly is a badass.
Yeah.
I was like rooting for her in that fight.
And then you get the people who are like, I knew she was going to win. You're like, bullshit. Show me a video of you saying that before the fight. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like nobody thought that she was going to win. Because Ronda was also, she's an interesting figure, because she to me, it's like women's mixed martial arts right now is going through the thing that mixed martial arts for men, when it got its start, was going through in like late 90s, early 2000s, but it's happening much more.
The Renaissance,
yeah. Yeah, it's really like, you're
people
seeing,
are exploding, yeah.
Ronda is almost like a Hoist Gracie type figure for women's mixed martial arts, where she was just so dominant for so long, like nobody had the answer for her. But now you're getting, the Matt Hughes type people that are coming in the women's division. So you're getting like Amanda Nunez's and, even Miesha Tate to some extent, I think was like a little bit more of a complete mixed martial artist than Ronda was in a lot of respects.
Yeah.
As far as just being a little bit more technical.
Right.
And that's why I think that I was actually it was interesting seeing how all that played out with Miesha actually coming in and winning the title against Holly after that. Because Holly is a fantastic striker, but she just wasn't a very complete mixed martial artist at the time. I just think that she still has work to do in that regard, and I think that she definitely has it in her to be a world champion. But she's kind of comparable to a Yair Rodriguez right now, where it's definitely one day can do it, or has proven that they have a good enough skill set to do it, but maybe just not yet.
Right.
That's you see that against how Yair, when he just fought Frankie Edgar, it was you're throwing in there with fucking Frankie fucking Edgar.
Yeah.
Who's one of the baddest motherfuckers that's ever been in that cage. I mean, as far as just being tough as nails, having wars with some of the most, experienced, most badass fighters, and just having, an insane skill set, and he's a veteran at this point. It's did anyone really think that Yair was going to win that fight? He's a very talented dude, and I think that, he's going to be a champion at some point. But it's did anyone really think that he was going to win that? Frankie Edgar's been on a fucking tear, too. I mean, he's one of those weird dudes where even, getting into his 30s, he's just getting better.
Yeah.
It's insane. It's those kind of outliers. Robbie Lawler's another one of those that, when he made his title run, it was like before that when he was in Strikeforce, he wasn't really that impressive.
Yeah.
He went from being like kind of like a mid-tier, like kind of moderate, like 70-30 fighter pretty much, where he was like winning 60 or 60 whatever odd percent of his fights, but he was like just like wasn't being very impressive, to being and putting on one of my favorite fights ever against Rory McDonald and against Carlos Condit, like having like these crazy wars. And he's like, people get through their little runs, it's like I'm hoping that Holly bounces back a little bit and has some time to work on everything and become a little bit more of a complete mixed martial artist before she keeps going. Just because she fought the perfect fight for Ronda when that came about,
right.
But I think that just like Ronda has catching up to do, Holly has a little bit of catching up to do too.
She's still a white belt in jiu-jitsu, I think.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm also the proponent of like belt ranks don't really matter that much.
Yeah,
like,
that's true. I'm a white belt.
Yeah, I was gonna say, who else is a white belt? Demetrius Johnson.
Yeah, exactly.
He doesn't train gi.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he just submitted a fucking jiu-jitsu black belt.
Yeah, exactly.
In his last fight, so it happens to or even like if I went into like a straight jiu-jitsu place, I'm sure they would probably have me throw on a white belt. I mean, like the guy that I trained underneath, I have a black belt in his system, but it's not gonna. Right. It's not gonna mean much if I go to somebody else's gym and
right. like a 10th Planet place or some shit.
Like if I went, if I went to 10th Planet and
like show me your leg locks, and you'd be like, fuck, man.
Yeah.
It's like that's all we do here.
Yeah, so it's like very much so, and it's in that way I don't take like belt ranks super serious, because there are plenty of black belts, like especially if you go to a country where it's very widely practiced like Brazil. I mean, there are so many black belts.
Yeah.
Because it's so widely practiced.
It's like a dime a dozen, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, that person definitely put in their time and they had to earn it, but that does not put them on the same level as, like a super high level practitioner that's fighting mixed martial arts. You know what I mean? Just because you have a black belt doesn't mean that you could compete with those people.
Yeah.
Or just because you aren't ranked doesn't mean that you can't compete with those people too. You know what I mean? It's
right.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's combat sports has always been sort of the great equalizer, because you can be incredibly strong in one thing and no one can ever beat you in that thing, and then someone comes along with a different thing and you're like, oh shit, I'm like in deep water here. This is something that I know nothing about. Like
I always love the way that Joe Rogan described it, because he describes competitive martial arts as like a very high level chess match with dire physical consequences.
Right.
I think that's like the best way that you can really describe it, because like we were talking earlier about martial arts and how people view them and everything like that, but it's like I went on a little bit of a kind of rambling rant about how it's kind of heinous to say that it's not an art, because these guys are constantly acting and reacting with the with this thing looming over that, like, at any point you could just get kicked or kneed in the fucking head and just get, like, put out. Or you could go against, like, a Damian Maya type figure who might not light you up on the feet, but he'll take you down, he'll get on your back, and he'll punch you in the fucking sides of the head and, just, sit on top of you and then choke you out. And it's, like, anything can happen at any time. And it's super interesting seeing what people bring to the table. And it's, like, it's just that much more of a... I think martial arts as a whole, regardless of whatever it is that you practice, as long as you keep an open mind, you'll go way further than you ever thought you could go with it. Because even if you're, if it's something that's not quite as practical, like, Taekwondo, like, not everybody can implement a Taekwondo spinning back kick into their game.
Right.
But then you'll get, like, a Yair Rodriguez who can do a jump spinning 360 kick and, kick BJ Penn in the fucking head.
Yeah. That's what I love about creative strikers. Are not afraid to take risks. And so I feel like it ties back into what we were saying earlier. There's I think there is room for creativity within martial arts, and you see it in guys like Connor and John Jones. And John
Jones is like one of the best examples.
He's so creative. You never know, and that's the thing, is if someone's creative, you never know what they're gonna throw next, because they don't really know what they're gonna throw next.
Yeah.
So how can you anticipate if they aren't thinking about it?
And it's what's beautiful about martial arts too, is that, like, you get guys that are from that school of thought or that way of fighting that are, like, super creative, like Anderson Silva's and John Jones and Demetrius Johnson, even to some extent, is, like, very creative.
Right.
And the way that he implements everything. But then, like, you can also appreciate guys that are very technical in their one thing. Like, I love Mirko Krokop Filipovic.
Yes.
I love watching him fight because he is such a high-level kickboxer.
Yeah.
Nobody had a fucking better highlight reel than that dude back in the day. Like just
all left and right head kicks. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so beautiful watching someone that is so good at that one aspect, or like watching Damian Maia with his jiu-jitsu.
Yes.
It's like, you can't tell me that's not beautiful in its own way. You might not like watching people get savaged by somebody else. You might not like watching that, but like you can't tell me that watching 240-pound Junior Dos Santos spinning, wheel kicking Mark Hunt in the head. You can't tell me that wasn't picturesque.
Yeah.
Just because like that guy who is that big, he's a massive dude, being able to move that fluidly
quick,
against someone who can knock you out with one punch. I mean, that's what this guy Mark Hunt is known for.
Right.
Being able to pull that off in the middle of a fight in a division of guys who are not known for doing shit like that. The heavyweight division. Nobody moves like that in the heavyweight division.
No, not
that
at
is
all.
incredible to watch. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I feel like, it's so unfortunate that it's still misunderstood to the level that it is.
Yeah.
Like just coming back full circle to what we were talking about before. It's like just keep an open mind. Even people who don't practice, if you're listening to this and you're on the fence about it, or if this ever, like, I hope that this kind of conversation, even as rambling and kind of ranting as it can be at points, it'll be, I hope that this at least opens up your eyes or gives you a different perspective on it. And from someone who's not even like a competitor, like, I don't like getting punched in the head. So, I decided not to do that. I don't want to do that for a living, or I don't want to do that. But just, keep an open mind. If you do train and, you're training, like branch out and train with new people, keep an open mind. If you don't train and you're just listening to this and getting the idea of, what it's like to see from someone else's perspective that is in it, that, isn't opposed to the violent aspects of it or anything like that, also keep an open mind. Just everybody, I think, in general, should keep an open mind more about things like that, too. So.
Absolutely. And I think that's a beautiful way to wrap it up. Even just if you're thinking about giving it a try, go and give it a try. It can be an engine for self-improvement, I think. You can grow spiritually, mentally, it will improve. The rest of your day will seem like less of a challenge because you've had to overcome extreme hardship in the gym.
Oh yeah, and it provides your life with balance too. Like, don't just focus on that either. There's like one of the things that I've always been a big proponent of that, I'll leave off on this too with you, so you can wrap up here, but branch out, do things that you didn't think that you would enjoy before.
Absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you for coming on today. I'm sure we'll have you back on. And that is it, you guys. Coming live from Seattle, Washington. Sunny Seattle, Washington for once. This is the At Last Podcast. Signing out, Jack Nelson, Jesse Eaves.
You guys have a good one, all right?
All right.